Before we start today's show, an important announcement you must not skip past. From the start of England's series in Pakistan on October the 7th, we are launching our own new Patreon account with 3 membership options, all of which are available to sign up for now. For £5 a month, we'll be giving you the Wisden Bronze package. That includes an additional weekly show every week that will be slightly different to our usual weeklies. There'll be an interview series called In the Bubble, where a big name from the game sits down with Joe Harmon to look back at their careers to date. There'll be Q&A style mailbag episodes, historical deep dives, we'll pick weird 11s, and there'll be a few shows in the spirit of Ben's news cycle column that MAG subscribers will know well. You'll also get daily podcasts after every day of England men's and women's international cricket, hitting your feeds an hour or so after the final ball is bowled. For marquee series like the Ashes or England versus India, there will be live, interactive Q&As after each day's play. Subscribers will also have access to the Patreon community function, which is essentially a direct group chat with us in them. Then on the Wisden Silver package for £7.50 a month, we will bring you everything in the Bronze package, plus free access to the digital version of Wisden Cricket Monthly, a discounted subscription to the print version, so £21 off the recommended retail price of $59.50, and 50% off any Fairfield Books title, the publishers that brought you Lara, The England Chronicles, and Being Geoffrey Boycott. And if you really want to show your dedication to all things Wisden, you can get the Wisden Gold subscription for £11.50 a month to get you as close to the team as possible. This will give you everything in the first 2 packages, plus access to a virtual live event each month featuring some of the podcast team. These will be Q&As, quizzes with prizes, panel discussions, things of that nature. So to sum up, if you pay nothing, you get exactly what you get now, our 2 weekly shows. If you pay £5 a month, you get an extra weekly show and a daily show reacting to every day of England men's and women's international cricket and all the other Patreon community benefits. For £7.50 a month, you get all of that plus the WCM and Fairfield discounts. And then for £11.50, you get all of that plus an interactive monthly live virtual show with an assortment of myself, Ben, Joe, Phil, Katya, Butch and Lauren. We've got really high hopes for it. And to give you a flavour of how much we're giving you, it's something like an extra 21 podcasts in October alone. And that's just on the Wisden Silver tier. We're really excited about this, if a bit daunted by the extra work. So we'd love it if you got involved. As part of Metro Bank's partnership with England Cricket, 3 England women's players met with Sophie Brown of Food by Sophie in Bristol to talk about her inspiration and Metro Bank's support for women in cricket and in business. Head to Metro Bank's social channels to see what happened when Sophie cooked up some Jamaican dishes for Lauren Bell, Kate Cross and Sarah Glenn. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. The domestic season is over and the World Cup is nearly upon us. We'll talk about the end of the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy, what made the Sunrisers so good, a bit of World Cup lead-up chat, the potential of equal pay in the women's and men's games, and more. We've also got reaction to one of the funnier pieces of commentary / nepotism you're likely to see. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya, Witney and Ben Gardner. Lauren Winfield-Hill will be joining us later in the show. Let's start with the end of the English domestic summer. Sunrisers were crowned the final ever winners of the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy. The Stars put up 212, thanks largely to Alice Davison-Richards, continuing her fine run of form with 93. But Sunrisers were always ahead in the chase that was prematurely ended by a thunderstorm. Katya, what turned things round for Sunrisers? Because they are historically awful. They were arguably the worst region. They finished last in every group stage bar one and had never played a knockout game before.
Yeah, it's arguably like one of the greatest ever turnarounds in cricket, given just how bad they were. They were comfortably the worst region over the first 3 years of competition, and then started to turn that round last year in the Rachael Heyhoe Flint. Still pretty bad. They didn't win a single match in the Charlotte Edwards Cup last year, and they only won 2 matches in the Charlotte Edwards Cup this year. So this was a very Rachael Heyhoe Flint specific turnaround. But over the first few years, when Sunrisers came in, they had a pretty set core of players, and they've largely kept with that same core of players. They lost a few over the on the way. Naomi Detani left at the end of the 2022 season. And then Trevor Griffiths, who coached them from the start, he left at the end of the 2022 season as well. Laura Marsh took over. And they got Danny van Neerkerk over as an overseas player for the 2023 season. She came in, captain for half the season. And I spoke to her, I remember at the end of last summer when she'd played there, and she said that she came in and what she'd wanted to put in was a more relaxed atmosphere in the Sunrisers, while also keeping professionalism and helping that professionalism to advance within that regional setup. And at the start of this year, they gave Grace Scrivens the captaincy, which potentially that's quite a risky move given how young Scrivens is and quite inexperienced. She's one of the younger players in the squad, but it's actually worked really well. Scrivens has been consistently their best batter throughout this year. They've also got a lot of all-rounders, which has really helped them over the course of the season. And they've brought in quite a lot of new talent over the last couple of seasons, particularly Jodie Rucock, and she played a pretty important part in the final as well. And they also had Andy Tennant come in as head coach, and that seems a pretty significant move as well. I think it's also worth pointing out their director of cricket, Danny Warren, who has done quite a lot of work, I believe, behind the scenes to turn that around for Sunrisers. But yeah, it's remarkable when you look back at the regional system in the history books. It will seem like a bit of an anomaly that Sunrisers won the final year and are forever Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy champions now.
Yeah, because it's not even as if they were that good this year. Like they sort of scraped through to the playoffs with the same record as the Blaze, who didn't. They got more bonus points, and kind of just came like hit form at the right time. I think that's there's probably two players to single out. One is Sophie Monroe, who it's not quite clear what happened here, but she just joined them on loan from the Blaze halfway through the season, having been one of the Blazers' best bowlers, and then was one of Sunrisers' best bowlers, and looked like the Blaze weren't that happy to let her go, but their release said that, you know, she wanted just to seek a different challenge, which could mean literally anything. But that was quite a big thing for them. And also Cordelia Griffith just hit form at the right time as well. I mean, she won the 100 with London Spirit. She didn't have a great tournament in that, but did supply one of the great moments with her reaction to the winning six in that. But then has come back and has hit 450s and 6 innings since coming back, including in the semi-final and the final. And if, you know, a player like Cordelia Griffith, who, you know, is a storied sort of domestic county pro, can just hit form at the right time, that is the kind of thing that can carry you to a title if you can sort of scrape together enough wins to ensure you're there at the end of the season. Like, but it is meant, because as you say, like across the first 3 years of their existence, or is that right? Yeah, well, so across their first 3 seasons in the RHF and across their first 3 seasons in Charlotte Edwards Cups, that's sort of fudging it slightly. They won 1 game. that's not very good.
They did have a tie. They had 1 tie.
Yes. And a no result.
One of the, I guess, pleasing aspects of the story is seeing Scrivens at the helm, because she was someone who was talked about a lot when she captained England in the Under-19 World Cup. And there's a lot of expectation around her. Were the expectations too high? You know, she's pretty much the same age as Alice Capsey, so she's still very, very young. It's okay that she hasn't maybe elevated into national honours in the way that people expected. She was, I guess, one of the higher profile omissions from the squad for the Ireland series, but it's a very competitive spot around the top 3 in the England side, so there's no disgrace in not being in there at this stage of her career.
I agree. I also think, particularly with women's players, we expect them to come through way, way younger than most of them actually should. Like Capsey is obviously the case in point of that, of being a player who did come through ridiculously young but managed that extremely well. And players have made their debuts so young historically that's almost what's expected. But what we should be looking at now and for the future is for players to have those formative years in domestic cricket, in a regional system, in a county system, to build that experience. You would never think, you know, an under-19 World Cup captain in the men's format would then be the next year England's best player. You know, and I think that's something that we should hope to see from the next few years, that players do get that time to develop and are allowed that kind of grace to find their feet. You know, it's still unclear whether Scrivens was injured or not for that Ireland series, and to come in and then captain the Sunrisers to a win in the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy is an incredible achievement for someone who's very, very young.
Player of the tournament was arguably Alice Davidson Richards, who obviously made a significant contribution in the final, which was an amazing run of form leading into the final as well. Ben, where's she at as a cricketer? Because people remember her scoring a Test 100 against South Africa at Taunton just over 2 years ago now, but hasn't really been involved in the England setup in recent times.
Yeah, but I think she's kind of where she was sort of even then, which is like kind of in and around it, but just a bit outside of competing to be in that first choice team. I think that she almost timed her run of form right, although she didn't win the tournament. She timed her run of form right in terms of the business end of the tournament, but actually not right for selection for that Ireland squad because she ended it so well. I think it was 270s and 290s in her last 4 innings. So if that run of form occurred earlier in the season, then she'd have been leading run score all the way through, and then she'd probably get selected for that Ireland series. As it is, you can see why they've looked to a few different players for that. She played an ODI at the end in that series against India at the end of last year. She was in that Test squad for the Ashes last year too, but then obviously women's Test selection is an odd thing when they play so few and far between. England end up picking Danny Wyatt for that game ahead of her, and you kind of have to say it was probably the right call. She made 99 runs in the game. I think almost got them to got them over that, or what was the only one to put up a fight really in that final innings. So, and she also kind of had an unusual career in that, talking about Grace Scrivens taking time to find her feet. That's what's happened for Alice Davison-Richard as well, where she's had to she's kind of built up a career when England have been so focused on young talent, and so it was always going to be hard for her unless she was like so clearly the very best that the domestic game had to offer. And I don't think it's quite been that, so you can see why England haven't gone all in on her, even though I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think I'd be more surprised if she didn't play for England again than if she did, but it also, I think it's a fair reflection of her standing that she has not managed to nail down a spot, but also she's just been there and thereabouts, and that's true of a lot of players, given the pool is growing, I think.
Yeah, I think also just her game suits longer form cricket. Even in 50-over cricket, I know she's had an amazing competition here, but if you look at her scoring rates and what she plays generally, it's not that of a player who's playing a level below them, if that makes sense. And you saw in her Test 100, she's a player who really suits that format. It's just they play so little of it. So even though she's got the 100 under the belt, it's not necessarily given that she's going to be in the side the next time round, because that performance is so long ago. And you've got a group of players that you see a lot of. Quite a big call to say to someone who's in and around the squad quite a lot, actually, you're going well, but we're going to take you out for someone who we've not seen for 2 years.
That's true of Grace Scrivens as well. When we're talking about what she might need to do to get England consideration on a consistent basis, it is the scoring rate thing. I mean, when you're talking about scoring below their level, I mean, Davison-Richard actually ends up with a strike rate of 85 in the competition, which is good. Scrivens scoring at sort of around 70, and that kind of seems like where she's sort of at. And she's one at the moment, you'd say, is suited to sort of that innings building. You can sort of depend on her, but that extra gear will be the thing. The other thing for Davison-Richard is she's just had an injury which stopped her bowling this year. She bowled a bit earlier in the season, then there was one game where she went off after 2 overs with an injury, and I think hasn't bowled since then. So that might have also, I mean, it's clearly not hampered her batting at all, but I think that's part of where she's at as well. If you're thinking like, well, why don't you pick someone who's in such good form for the T20 World Cup even? She's not actually able to fill that all-round status at the moment. So,
just some news around the Sunrisers. So, Maddie Villiers, who is from Essex and has played for them previously, has signed a 3-year deal with Durham. We've covered the domestic restructure a lot this summer, but I think what happens at Durham is probably the most interesting aspect of the who signs for who, especially considering actually Durham are one of the counties who, relatively speaking, have publicly announced, maybe not the fewest, but one of the fewest number of signings. Related to the 2025 domestic restructure, we had some news this week around pay. The ECB shared a press release stating that minimum starting salaries will be equalised across men's and women's professional domestic cricket from 2025. This is both at rookie and senior pro level. It has also been agreed that the 8 first-class counties with Tier 1 status will have minimum squad sizes of 15 contracted players, and those counties are required to invest at least £500,000 on their player salaries in 2025. There will also be a salary cap of £800,000 a year that has been agreed for all 8 counties with Tier 1 status. Those minimum salaries are believed to be £20,000 for the rookie contracts and £28,000 for the senior pros. Katya, this feels like a step, albeit a very small one, in the right direction. The ICEC report recommended equal pay between the women's and men's games by 2029, something that the ECB is yet to commit to. Do you think the emphasis of the debate is slightly off in that it's not as if there are only two options here, which is one, women's cricketers should be paid what women's cricketers are currently paid, and two, totally equal pay? Because it feels like whenever this discussion comes up, there's a debate around equal pay, but we're nowhere near it, right? So it's quite a hypothetical debate.
Yeah, I think as well, we should clarify that this isn't equal pay. I think people would read the headlines and go, oh, this is now women's county players are going to be paid the same as men's county players, when that's not quite the case. The minimum baseline has been equalised, so it's almost a equal minimum pay for players across the board. And also just on that minimum salary and investment, I think the minimum salary investment for men's counties is about £1.5 million. They've also announced a cap on the salaries at 800 grand, but we were talking earlier, and it's very unlikely that most counties will hit that cap. I think the real kind of frustration on the equal pay debate is not necessarily that we need to be paying female county cricketers the exact same as men's cricketers straight away. It's more that the disparity between the highest paid men's domestic player and the highest paid women's domestic player is so vast for me. That's more the kind of difficulty with it. If you look at the kind of baseline of salaries that are now the same, that it's a good step, but there feels like there's no real progress to minimising that gap or even bringing it slightly closer together. And we should also clarify that this doesn't concern the 100 either, which is arguably, well, not even arguably, it's the competition across the summer where equal pay is the most inarguable thing that needs to change, because the 100 can't function without the women's competition. And there's been no news yet on what's going to happen to the salaries next season, but they're still very unequal. So it is a bit of a tricky one every time this debate comes up to work out how you think about it, because the women's county game, or the women's regional game as it was, pulls in a lot less fans than the men's game does. That's partly what we're trying to address by the Project Darwin and the development that it's going under. But it's a really tricky one to work out how you feel about it. And I don't think it should be a debate that the women deserve to be paid more and more in line with what the men are paid, even if it's not exactly equal. I think getting het up that everything must be exactly the same distracts from real progress that could be being made on working towards that and bringing up top line salaries particularly.
Well, before we were recording, you made the point as well that it's about moving forward and progression to a state that makes people want to be professional cricketers more. Yeah. That is something that can still change, and hopefully this is a small step in the right direction there. That's a more pressing thing than what is still a relatively theoretical debate around equal pay in 5 years' time.
Yeah, there's an incentive aspect there. You know, you look at the senior pro salary of 28 grand, that's not a massive incentive to possibly ruin your body beyond repair in what is a very short professional career, and then have to go out and work really hard afterwards just to earn a living. We should also clarify that affects men's county cricketers, but again, the highest paid men's county cricketers will be paid a lot higher than the highest paid women's county cricketers. And that's why this needs to be brought up quickly, is that there's just no incentive at the minute, financial reward to pay play women's county cricket. And also the add-ons that men's domestic players can do to maximise their income are much greater than women's add-ons at the minute. Very few female players are able to play franchise leagues at the minute. There are less franchise leagues.
Well, very, very, very few players who are not on central contracts will get many franchise gigs. They might get a WBBL gig, but that's probably it. Whereas there are almost hundreds of men's English players who don't play for England who get those deals that supplement their salaries at their counties.
Yeah, and we can also think about England central contracts as well. Like, we don't know exactly what the England central contracts are. And by all reports, England players are probably pretty happy with what they get paid. But there is still theoretically a massive disparity. Well, there is a disparity between what England men's and women's players are playing. And that gap is massive between domestic players and England players in the women's game. It's even more massive for men's, but the baseline is higher. So it's the disparity that's really the problem. And it's a good step in equalising base salaries, but it doesn't really change much. The average salary for regional players was around 25 grand. But what this does do is there are going to be 120 domestic contracts next year as opposed to around 80 this year. And it means that there's going to be more money for those 120 contracts so that we're not diluting the amount of money that's in the game. There is a baseline of what those players are going to be paid.
Ben, on the ICEC report recommendation, that recommendation to have equal pay by 2029, that's not saying, we just need to make this happen. It's actually about putting the women's game in a position where that is just the understandable and logical thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And the ICC report is ambitious and is prodding the ECB, and the ECB are yet to commit to that target of 2029. Not sure where they will, but yeah, it's
because one of the things people will say about the equal pay debate is, the women's county game will be in its first year in its current structure, probably won't bring in as many fans as the men's domestic game, therefore the players should earn less. And this is actually, you go on.
Yeah, but then there's also the arguments about how the men's county game makes money and what it exists to serve, and therefore why you're paying the players the wage you do as well. That it's sometimes some aspects of that are a loss leader too, and it's not as if that there are men's county games that also don't get a huge attendance, but we're not advocating for paying those men less because we know that it's all part of kind of the ecosystem too, and that's where also the women's 100 comes into it, because and this is where there's also different things, like sometimes there'll be an argument against equal pay that it doesn't draw in the same revenue. I actually think with the women's 100, although attendances in ground maybe and probably TV figures are a bit lower than for the men's competition, I don't think the men's competition could exist without the women's competition, so you can argue there that it is as much a revenue generator. But then there's also actually just the market forces that are at play with what do you have to pay the best men's player to get him into the men's 100 versus what you have to pay the best women's player to get them into the women's 100,
just because the men's competition is competing with lots of other competitions, whereas at the moment the women's competition isn't.
But then also, I completely agree with what Katya was saying about how the equal pay debate is it's not, it can sometimes mislead and obscure some progress if progress doesn't mean equality right then, but because it is still rightly an eventual goal, it is going to present maybe even a political PR problem for the ECB at some point in relation to the private investment in the 100 debate, because one of the arguments around private investment in the 100 is that we can't get the best men's players yet because we can't pay them enough money. So you're going to have private investment, then you're going to end up actually increasing the maximum salaries for the best men's cricketers by quite a lot, and that is going to come as quite a stark thing when that's basically is going to increase pay inequality, even if it increases the amount that women's cricketers get paid in the 100 overall. And that will be something that the ECB have to confront at that point, because when that happens, people will point at it and say, hang on, there's more money coming to the 100 and you're not using it to pay women's cricketers the same amount as men. What's going on there?
Moving on to next year, how much are we going to see of the England players in the domestic competitions? You'd have thought it'd be a good thing and a good opportunity to sort of turbocharge the start of the new era by getting the most recognisable faces in to draw the crowds in. We've got a reasonable idea of what the schedule will look like in 2025. Katya, how much will we, for example, see Sophie Eccleston play in the domestic comps next year?
Yeah, we don't have an exact estimation because the exact dates for the T20 Blasters it will be and the Metrobank One Day Cup haven't been announced yet. But if we think about when the finals days have been set for, we know that the T20 Blast final will be at the end of July, and the Metrobank One Day Cup final will be in September. England women have a very similarly scheduled summer to what they've had this year, in that all of their international cricket is over by July, over by the start of the 100. And they've also got the added complication that there is a women's 50 over World Cup in India, which is earlier than the T20 World Cup is this year. It's in September. So given that England will play the West Indies in a T20 series and the West Indies in an ODI series, as well as playing India in both formats in May and July, it doesn't look like there's going to be that much space for the England players to play in the T20 Blast before the latter stages of it. So before July, they might be able to play some of the early games, or they might be able to fit in a game, depending on whether they're released by the ECB, to play in those games in May and in June. But it does feel a bit odd that you're going to rebrand and relaunch the County Summer and the England players are going to be probably quite a limited part of that. Also with the Metro Bank finals day, although again we don't know the dates for the exact dates for when the World Cup is going to be next year, given when it is, it would be unlikely, you would think, that the players involved in that tournament would play in the final of the One Day Cup. And we used the example of Sophie Eccleston actually earlier when we were talking about it. One of the main points of this Project Darwin has been to bring the women's teams under the existing county umbrella so that they are more recognisable to the existing pool of county fans. If you're trying to get, for example, a Lancashire fan who maybe is a casual fan of women's cricket, but would get behind a Lancashire women's side to watch the game, they'll probably know who Sophie Ecclestone is. But will they know who Eve Jones is, for example? And Sophie Ecclestone would be a much greater pull to pull in those fans that are already casual fans to make them proper fans of the side. So it does feel a little bit counterproductive if your England players are actually not going to be available for that. And that's been kind of one of the problems with the regional system as well, that the England players have been pretty few and far between for the most part in those matches. And that does come down to the schedule that is forever talked about and we forever talk about. And again, it's very easy to sit up here and say that's rubbish. It is rubbish. I wouldn't want to be the one doing the schedule still.
That's it for part one. In part two, we'll hear from Lauren, who's out in Australia. Caribbean 1 week, Australia the next. Lauren, you've jetted off to Queensland?
Yeah, just arrived yesterday morning, 6 a.m. So yeah, we've probably got about half an hour before the jet lag strikes. So we'll have to get in all our good stuff within the half an hour, I reckon.
It's still September, but the Aussie season starts very soon. Don't you fancy a break?
No, to be honest, like I feel really good. Like this, at different points, I sort of feel like you want a break, and I will take little windows here and there, but I'm not somebody that likes to have weeks off. Like a week or a month. Weeks in a row or a month off or something like that, because I get twitchy. I get like I want to get back into it, but I sort of prefer to like I had a week off before I came out, obviously because we got knocked out in the semi. So I prefer to take little pockets of like refreshers, rather than like big chunks of time off. I feel like that works better for me and my body and my mind and whatnot. So I actually feel pretty good and pretty excited to get going out here.
You were at Queensland last winter as well. Obviously, big strides are being made in the English domestic game over the last couple of years. How would you say the two compare at this point in time?
Yeah, to be honest, like I think the standard's really good over here. It's, there's not a lot between the two countries standard wise. I do think England get it right in lots of ways. And I came back and sort of spoke to the PCA and ECB about it actually when I first came back last year, was just the volume of games that you play is much healthier in England. There's obviously different challenges over here logistically with travel and flights and having to stay for several days and things like that. But just the volume and frequency of high pressure games over here is not, an example of that would be like last year we finished our group games and we had a 2-week break until the final because we had a bye round and then obviously another week then until you played the final. So it can be quite stop-start. And obviously the way that they do it is you play, day off, play again. So, it comes thick and fast. Whereas in England, I guess you play 2 or 3 times a week, but it's sort of more couple of days in between, or it sort of feels a bit more like a regular season. And when you start in sort of April, you feel like you're playing regular cricket all the way through to September. Whereas here it does feel a little bit more patchy. But in terms of the professionalism of the game, I think one good thing, especially being out in Queensland, is just the ability to be on turf all the time. So, every hit you're outside on grass, you're fielding outside the whole year round pretty much. So there's obviously really good upsides to just being in a better climate.
That's really encouraging, right? 5 years ago, the chat was that the two domestic structures were worlds apart. And now, if in 2024 we're saying they're broadly comparable, that's really good signs for the English game.
Yeah, no, I think, to be honest, I think England have got it really in a really healthy spot. The other thing is, like, they've never had a domestic T20 competition over here for the last few years. And they've brought in this Spring Bash, which is like a sort of precursor to the Big Bash, but it's not. There's been a lot of controversy over that because it's not state-based. So it's sort of Big Bash based, but without all the internationals, and it's a bit bitsy. They sort of had an opportunity probably to bring in another state T20 competition, like I think they used to quite a while ago. But it's ended up being quite bitsy. So, like, for example, obviously we play this weekend, then we play next weekend, and then there's this Spring Bash. So a lot of the Queensland girls will then, go and play. You got Sipple, who's going to the Sixers. You've got Vol, who's going to Thunder. But we're going to be playing against each other, and it's not actually the Big Bash. So it's kind of a bit strange. But even just the volume of sort of home and away fixtures in England, a T20 and a 50 over comp. I think the volume of games is a big plus in England.
Obviously, it's a long way away, the 2025 season, but have you heard anything more about what Tier 2 will look like? Obviously, you've signed on with Yorkshire next year. Yorkshire will not be Tier 1 in 2025, just because, pre-season should be starting quite soon. So, in theory, quite important to know what's going on next year.
Yeah, no, and your guess is as good as mine, ours, anybody's really at the minute. I think my understanding is that we've not got an awful lot of clarity on what the fixtures look like in terms of when they will be. We've got a rough idea, but there's been nothing sort of set in stone, which again does make it pretty challenging for pre-season tours. Like I know Rich and I have been speaking a lot about for Yorkshire is, okay, well, how do we try and play against Tier 1 teams in friendlies, or, play against boys academy teams and really try and sort of boost the volume of games that you've got, but also, make sure that you're still competing as often as you can, and being challenged. So yeah, I think there's a few moving parts that are still yet to be nailed on. But yeah, hopefully we get a bit more, and things like that FA Cup style cup, what does that look like? Because obviously for us that would be like a pretty big carrot dangling, with the opportunity then, you can play against some teams that will maybe stretch you a little bit more. But yeah, we've yet to have a huge amount of information.
Is it at the moment the lack of information potentially a stumbling block to certain players committing to Yorkshire next year, just because you literally don't know what cricket you'll be playing? So from a development point of view, if you're a younger player, you don't know what is best for your development because you don't know what Yorkshire will be doing next year.
No. And I think, even in my appraisal before I came out here speaking to Rich and stuff, it's a niche challenge for the coaches, and one that they're really excited about, but it's also quite challenging is that, we've got some youngsters that we've signed that are, just turning 18 and very much at the start of their journey. And you've got, some players like myself who have obviously played a lot more and are at the different point in their career. Yet we've got to be able to facilitate everybody's needs across the whole spectrum, really. So, yeah, it is challenging, and it's like, speaking to the guys, the coaches, that's the art of coaching, so they tell me, and that's the beauty of it, is actually how do we cater for all and make sure that everybody's, I think, like the fixtures aside, obviously you want to compete, but I think, you can create a lot of that with your environment and how you train as well, to ensure that people are being stretched and really, sort of advancing their game.
This week the ECB announced that the minimum salaries in the men's and women's domestic games will be level from 2025. Two questions really. One, what did you make of that news? And two, what do you think still needs to be done over the next couple of years?
I think first things first, I think it's a positive thing. There's no part of that where you go, well, that's not a good thing for the game. Clearly it is. Clearly you want people benefiting, from being able to, I know like a lot of girls growing up, they were working, you couldn't just be a full-time cricketer. So the bottom end of the scale is that the beauty of that is that they get to be full-time cricketers. They don't have to go to work and try and train around it and things like that, which is obviously challenges that have been in the past. But I don't think we can sit and go, oh, we've got this right, sit back and put our slippers on and say, job well done. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of what does that average look like? What does the volume of games look like? The volume of televised games, what does the crowd, how are we getting the crowds in, things like that. And it's not just about the money being on a level playing field at any level, whether you're the highest paid or the lowest paid. I think it's still about the opportunities, to play, and then to the facilitating the opportunities to train and get better. And things like, the support staff around players, is it equal across the board? Do you get the same visibility around the club? Do you get the same opportunities to train? Have certain groups got, we used to say that, the graveyard shift on a Friday night, where it was like, oh, you've got you're training at Headingley. And this is obviously back in the day, but it was like, yeah, but it's 8 till 10 on a Friday night. Like, it's not exactly prime time. You get to Friday, you finish school or college, and you're like, oh, I'm pumped. Can't wait to go to cricket training. Mom's trying to keep you awake in the car. So it's things like, I always think it's the layers, but it's the layers. I think it's a great move, but it's always about the layers below and things like that. And the other thing is, like you want the opportunity to work with world-class coaches and support staff, things like that. What do they look like? Do their salaries reflect getting world-class practitioners? So it's always lots of arms to it and lots of layers to it.
I think facilities is a really big point, and especially with the restructure next year. Are you confident that we'll be getting closer to equality in terms of use of facilities? Because I remember, we were talking during the 100, and it just about works during the 100 when you have 4 teams trying to use the same playing area in a very short space of time. But over the course of a whole season with 2 big groups of players, do you think that we'll get equal opportunities in terms of being able to use the best facilities at all times?
I think it's a real challenge. I know it's a real challenge for the wickets themselves, for not being tired with another whole group of, you're not just got first team, but you'll have second team or underage or academies or whatever, from obviously both male and female. So the volume that's actually going on the grounds and the games that are then multiplied for actually I know there's been a lot of talks about the wickets this summer and things like that. I think it'll be different for different teams, like we've been quite lucky where we've actually trained at Headingley an awful lot, so we're used to that being our base. We gym there. We pretty much flutter between Wheatwood and Headingley, as do the men. So but I know there's more challenges been to a team like Sunrisers, where they've sort of been based here, there and everywhere. I know that they're sort of trying to find a bit of a base for Surrey, out somewhere different to the Oval, where it's got really good facilities. So I think it's not a blanket thing. I think different teams will have different challenges. Obviously, if you've operated out of HQ already, it's you've probably got used to it a little bit and can just about manage it. But if you sort of haven't, then it might be quite difficult. But it's a balancing act, and it's the fairness bit as well, as like, like I said, it's when are you actually getting the windows to train? Do you always get the last slot, or things like that, where it's like, oh well, the girls are training at the ground, like they should be happy. It's like, well, not 8 o'clock on a Friday night, we're not. And I'm talking when we're growing up, but it's it's just an example of, it should be all right. Well, the men are training one morning. They've got the I don't know, the 8 till 11. So you got to get up early but then you switch and you flip it. So it's fair that, you don't always have the early slot, or you don't always have the prime slot and things like that. Even just little things like, which seem really like nonchalant, but things like, if it starts to rain and groundies do all they can to keep you on training or whatever, make it equal. Not, oh,
Mm.
nah, I can't get you out today. We've had a bit of rain. It's like, what? It rained 2 hours ago. It's fine. You know,
Mm.
like, as again, I can only speak from like Yorkshire and like Robbo at Yorkshire. I've had nets at 8 a.m. in the morning when the sun's coming up because I've missed training for whatever reason. But I wouldn't imagine that's the same. It's like building those relationships and that sort of equality amongst all staff and everybody involved in the clubs.
Well, it sounds like there are lots of questions still to be answered over the winter. Lauren, cheers for your time. I'll let you get off. I appreciate you're probably quite jet lagged at the moment.
So very excitingly, we have Victoria's Sunrisers head coach Andy Tennant on the show, fresh from Sunrisers' win in the last ever Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy final at the weekend. Andy, thanks so much for joining the show. That win must have felt pretty sweet after a couple of years of hard graft.
Yeah, it was. It was. It was the outcome of a lot of hard graft, as you say. Always nice to put the cherry on top of the icing, but I think it was probably reward for a lot of hard work and a lot of steady progress that we've made over the last couple of years.
Did you have one eye on the forecast on the weekend?
Yeah, well, we kind of had to because you couldn't really avoid it. We obviously hoped that we would get the whole game in, but the forecast was that there would be rain coming in sort of mid-late afternoon. So we priced that into our thinking a little bit in terms of in terms of the toss and in terms of how we manage things on the day. But yeah, we were just pleased to come out on the right side of it.
You must have been pretty pleased to have gone off when you did when the rain came.
I suppose so. Not really. I mean, we've been playing some really good cricket, and the girls have been batting really nicely. So we were actually quite enjoying the process. So it would have been really nice to go on and seal it out on the pitch at the end, but we're not in control of that bit, I guess. So yeah, once we came off, and we probably realised that if we didn't get back on, that obviously we were sort of comfortable winners on the day. That was pleasing, but there was one bit of us always wanted to try and get back out, but yeah, that is what it is, isn't it?
Trophy's a trophy.
Correct, yeah.
Sunrisers had a pretty difficult time in the first few years of the regional system. You joined the setup at the end of the 2022 season, and at that point, Sunrisers hadn't won a game in 3 seasons of the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy and had won 1 match in the Charlotte Edwards Cup. What did you see as the main issues the side were facing when you joined them?
Yeah, so it was certainly when I joined, sort of end of 2022, and I went and watched a couple of games at the back end of that 2022 season before I was actually offered the job while we were going through the interview process. And I guess what I saw was a lot of talent that probably just wasn't quite fulfilling its potential. It was clear we needed to make some changes. We needed some more players in. We brought some young players through from the academy. So, but from that perspective, I think there was just a lot of talent there and a lot of potential, and I just saw that and got really excited by it. So we knew we had the potential. It was just really harnessing that, and I suppose putting some systems and thinking in place that would allow us to move the team forward. And to be honest, it was a kind of 3-year plan to get to where we are now, if you like, and we've kind of done it in 2, which is great. We're still a little bit shy in T20 cricket, so we're hoping to put that right next year. But yeah, so I guess I just saw lots of potential, and I knew that with some hard work and a bit of direction that the team could be successful.
And what was that 2022-23 off season like? That first few months of being with the side?
So yeah, I guess there was a lot of hard work put in. So I think the guts of that was really about. Because it wasn't for me to come in and say, look, I think we need to do X, Y, and Z. It was really about us as a collective working out how we were going to win games of cricket. And there are some, cricket's a game of numbers. You can't run away from the numbers. So we pretty quickly worked out together what it was going to take for us to win games, and put a process in place for each and every individual to contribute to that. And I think we just found that, or not found, we designed a sort of what it takes to win model together. And then gradually, and I suppose with a lot of hard work, went about putting that in place. So yeah, that's really the guts of it. But it was certainly a very it was a really tough winter. but it was a good winter in terms of, being really productive for both the individual players and the team, I think. And for me as a coach, I learned a lot about the group through that winter.
And that kind of hard work paid off pretty quickly. You won the first match of the 2023 season against reigning champions Southern Vipers, no less. That was the first of 6 matches in the Rachael Heyhoe Flint that season that Sunrisers would win. That must have been a pretty sweet win, that first one against Southern Vipers in 2023.
Yeah, it was, because I think, and really importantly, it gave the girls a glimpse of what we could do and that our potential could be fulfilled. So I think that was a really great start to that season. It was actually then followed up by quite a tough period, and we really battled through the middle of that summer. Had a pretty poor T20 campaign, but then at the back end of the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy in 2023, we kind of found our rhythm and our mojo a little bit, and we really found a way to win consistently, which is what we'd been trying to do over the previous year, was just to try and find a method of winning and start to do it consistently. So I think the back end of 2023 was really the time that built the belief that we could do something special in 2024, albeit we maybe didn't know it was going to be quite as special as it was.
It kind of ties in with a quote I saw from Danny Warren, who's a director of cricket down at the Sunrisers region. And she said after the win on the weekend, Sunrisers used to be a team who found a way to lose, and now they find a way to win. How much of your job was to just instill confidence in players?
Oh, very much so. And I think instilling confidence comes in a lot of different ways. I guess by, first of all, believing in their potential, which I think was there certainly for me and all to see. But then just finding a method that would allow you to do that bit by bit. I don't think you don't just magic confidence out of thin air. It comes through hard work, a little bit of success, and believing yourself. So I'd like to think that what we did as a coaching staff, and not just me, but there's a good number of coaching staff involved in the process, was actually just build a culture that encouraged continuous improvement. So day by day, just looking to get a bit better and a bit better. And I think we've done that, and I think the girls have embraced that. And I think they recognised that we were on a journey, and it wasn't just going to be a magic bullet. So and I think we've taken some blows in that journey. I think, as I said on Saturday, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but we have managed to ride that, and we hit form at the right time this season, and we beat the other 3 teams in the top 4 in our last 3 games. So it was a pretty sweet way to round off what's been a successful season for us.
Mm. And a pretty pivotal moment in that journey seems to be giving Grace Scrivens the captaincy at the end of last season on a permanent basis. At the time, Grace was still a teenager, and being put in charge of people on the field more than 10 years older than her. What did you see in Grace that made you take put that trust in her to lead the side?
Yeah, it's a great question. She's got a lot of leadership qualities, and she's got quite an old head on young shoulders, if you like. So she's a scholar of the game. She's hungry. She relates really well to the other members in the team, because we've got quite a young side as well. Don't get me wrong, she's still learning, but I suppose the attributes for leadership and captaincy were always there, and it was just a question of when we were going to, I suppose, push the button and allow that to happen. And it just worked that at the sort of middle to end of that T20 block in 2023 just felt like the right moment for us to have a bit of a change. So we put the trust in Grace. We had Deneva Neerkirk around at the time, who had leadership experience, who could help. We'd Maddie Villiers, who's a relatively experienced player with England experience there as vice captain as well. So we were pretty confident at that time that was the right time to give Grace the reins. And obviously we haven't regretted it, because she's shown real leadership, and that's whether leading from the front through performance or sheer will or determination, or whether it's actually working with others, giving people real clarity about their roles, her tactical understanding of the game. So she has all those qualities. So when you put all of that together, and you put this sort of strong working relationship that we'd built together as captain and coach, it didn't feel like much of a gamble. It just felt like the right thing to do. And I think she's proved that probably was the right thing to do. And she will go from strength to strength, I'm sure. Her leadership qualities are there for all to see, including the ECB, who, who allowed her to captain England A last year when there was 4 regional captains on the field. So they see something in her as well. And I'm sure she will be a strong leader moving forward. And she's been great for Sunrisers. So we're just happy to have her both as a cricketer and a leader.
Another player I wanted to ask you about was Jodie Grewcock, who's still 19. She took 19 wickets across the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy this year at an average of 25.95, including 2 in her first over in the final. She looks like she has quite a future ahead of her.
Yeah, she does. Jodie's one of those great cricketers. She's a lovely girl, and she just keeps life and cricket really simple. She's got a really sound batting technique as a left-handed top order batter. Keeps the game really simple. Is improving all the time. She's a warrior with competitive spirit who wants to be the best she can be. So she has all the ingredients with the bat and the ball. From her leg spin point of view, she just worked really, really hard. She was a batter who bowled a little bit, but over the last couple of years, she's worked really hard on her game, and she attacks the stumps, which is valuable in the women's game, and she keeps the game really simple. So yeah, I genuinely believe she does have a big future ahead of her, and and it couldn't happen to a better person, to be honest.
I also wanted to ask you about the disparity in performance in the Charlotte Edwards Cup, which you've mentioned already. You finished bottom of the group in that competition this year, won 2 out of 10 matches in the format. What's caused those kinds of problems in the Charlotte Edwards Cup that you weren't able to address opposed to the Rachael Heyhoe Flint?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely an element of our skill, the skill set that we had when I came in, and still to a certain extent has been better suited to 50 over cricket. I think we have a really strong 50 over playing group. I think from a T20 perspective, year one there was a lot of learnings because we really just weren't playing the game the way we needed to be successful. We've tried to address that in 2024. I think, to be honest, our 2-7 or 2-8, whatever our record was in the T20, probably wasn't reflective of where we were. We felt we should have had another couple of wins. We blew a couple of good opportunities to win games. So we probably felt that we were kind of halfway up the table team in T20 cricket this year, with a view to pushing on again next year. And I still think that's the case. But I think the extra confidence we've found from the way we've played our 50 over cricket, and I think we're definitely becoming a more dynamic team with the bat. I think we've been on a journey from being an unsuccessful batting unit to now being an effective batting unit, and we're on the journey to being an even more dynamic batting unit. So I think from that perspective, we expect to be much more competitive towards the top end of the table in T20 next year as well. It's just taken us a little bit longer to click in that format, I think.
And on the subject of next season, what were the challenges this year in knowing that this was the last year of the regional system and that this side essentially, for all intents and purposes, wouldn't exist going forward in 2025?
Yeah, so I think the first challenge was exactly that, and I think we've kind of successfully reframed that as a group. I think, and the girls have to take huge credit for this as well. That we've actually never seen this as the end of Sunrisers. We've just seen it as the next step in this team's journey, and that next step is to become Essex Women, and we're excited about that. But obviously disappointed to lose the Sunrisers brand and identity. We've had great support from Middlesex as well on that, as our kind of parent county at the time. So sad about that bit going, but it just feels like an evolution of the team. It's almost like the kind of butterfly or the moth coming out of the chrysalis a little bit, where it's just the next step in our journey, and we've always looked at it as that. So while Sunday for a lot of people was the end of regional cricket, was the end of the Sunrisers, it was just the next step for this group, and we're fortunate that the vast majority of this group will continue on with us at Essex, and we're just really excited about that moving forward.
Has it been tough? Because there must have been discussions, especially with the players, around contracts for next season. We've just seen that Maddie Villiers will be going to Durham and won't be going on to Essex, for example. Has it been tough to keep the players focused on this year rather than thinking about contracts for next year and how that's going to work? Because we didn't have a clear idea of how it was going to work until halfway through this season.
Yeah, that undoubtedly was a challenge, and again, credit to the girls for being able to compartmentalise that and to be able to focus on being the best cricketers they could be. But I think that's testament to the journey that they've been on in terms of building their resilience, mental skills, etc. And we've got an outstanding sports psychologist who's been with us for the duration, Kate Green, who's a great practitioner and, one of the outstanding people in our field. And she's been great at just making sure that the girls are able to focus on what they need to focus on and when. And there have been times to have the contract discussions, and there's been times to worry about what the future looks like. But we've managed to separate that from game time and us going out and being able to perform on the field. And I think, in fairness, although we're kind of changing parent company, if you like, to Essex, there's still a lot of similarities that will progress on. And I probably feel for some of the other counties, sort of like the Northern Diamonds in Yorkshire, that was a really tough period for them as well. So I think there were others who had it worse than us, but we just managed to sort of compartmentalize and negotiate that little challenge by just saying this is just the next step.
And I guess that process kind of kicks into gear now. Like, we've got the trophy, but now straight on to what comes next.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, when for us as a sports staff, when you take the medals off around your neck, you're starting to think about, what does 2025 look like? Where do we go? We've got, as we say, unfortunately, we lose Maddie and a couple of other players potentially, but we're also bringing players in. So we're just looking at that new dynamic, how it moves us forward, and again, just really excited about the prospects for the future, because this is a young team. It's hungry. We're desperate for more success. We're desperate to grow. We've got Sophie Monroe in full time now, which is great. She was on loan from Blaze this season. And bringing other players in as well. So Sophia Smale coming in from Western Storm as well. So we're excited about that journey. Some of our young players have got a year older as well and a year more mature. So we're just excited that we've got a young, hungry group who just want more success. So yeah, it's going to be a hard-working winter, but hopefully another exciting summer in 2025.
Bit of news to run through. So Heather Knight has apologised after she was reprimanded and given a suspended £1,000 fine for attending a fancy dress party in blackface in 2012. Following the announcement of that piece of news, Knight released a statement saying, "I'm truly sorry for the mistake I made in 2012. It was wrong and I've long regretted it. Back then, I simply was not as educated as to the implications and consequences of my actions as I have become since. There was no ill intent meant. Whilst I can't change the past, I am passionate and committed to using my platform to promote inclusivity across the game, ensuring underrepresented groups are afforded the same opportunities and fulfilment within the game as I have." Australia ended up beating New Zealand 3-0 in a T20I series in Australia. Ash Gardner was player of the match in her first game back, having missed the opener after that collision in training that we talked about on last week's pod. Katya, have there been any updates to the concussion story since we talked about it last week?
Well, the Australia side have banned Vortex, which is the game that Gardner got injured in.
What is Vortex?
It's like, those foam kind of rockets that you throw around when you're a kid.
The one that sort of, there's a little plastic bit that tells you how many rotations it's done.
Yeah, it's quite fun, I think. I thought, when I was watching it, I thought, is that Aussie rules? Not really knowing what Aussie rules looks like. But I don't think it is Aussie rules. So they've banned that activity in a similar way to how England banned football after Johnny Bairstow broke his ankle, was it? Or broke whatever?
Rory Burns was
so there's lots of football injuries, but Bairstow did it in before a Sri Lanka tour, and then Burns did it again a couple of years later, and that's when it got banned. And I think they now play it again. And it kind of shows that football wasn't the problem. Having lots of athletes playing a competitive sport as part of a warm-up is the problem, but also they need to warm up somehow. I don't know, but yeah.
So that's quite a good Aussie translation of England banning football, right? It sounds quite Australian that they've banned Vortex rather than they've banned football. But she has suffered, I think that was could have been the 8th concussion of her career. So it's fairly standard that they probably should ban that, given they're dealing with players who could be that fragile.
Elsewhere, South Africa beat Pakistan 2-1 in Pakistan. There was a match-winning knock from young South African batter Annery Dirksen, who whacked 44 off 23 in the chase in the final game. Ben, just looking at the South Africa squad for the World Cup, injection of youth.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I guess partly that's enforced. So I think there's 4 changes, I think, from the squad last time round. But Dirksen is one of those ones who she was in the squad for the last T20 World Cup, but she's now sort of maybe establishing herself. This feels like maybe hopefully a bit of a breakthrough knock for her. The big change from their squad from last time is Shadam Ismail. He's retired. There was some discussion that she might sort of come out of retirement for this tournament, but that's not happened. So Deneva Nikirk, she's not retired, but is also not been selected this time. But yeah, I guess there's a few of those younger players. There's a couple who are in the U19 World Cup squad who have got into it. So there is a bit of that going on, but also it does feel like they are still dependent on that golden generation to an extent. But yeah, and that was just a good series. That South Africa-Pakistan series. I mean, Pakistan winning the second game, setting up a decider. And just emphasise that this could just be quite a good World Cup, basically, that I'm excited for, and also just such a lopsided one as well. I mean, although South Africa won this, I think that actually, if Pakistan, who you'd look at it and say are the weakest team in Group A, are pushing, the second strongest side on paper team in Group B, pretty close, and it makes it weird from an English perspective, given that anything other than semi-final qualification is complete abject failure,
and almost topping the group.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah, and then after that, it's like, well, they could just come up against a side who are just better than them, or at least as good at them, and can beat them in T20 on their day. So that's weird, and also that there's going to be so much focus on. I guess it's still interesting who's the second team in England's group to an extent, South Africa, West Indies, but that first group there's all to play for, and the second group is just that bit weaker. But yeah,
we'll get to Pakistan in a bit. We've got 2 more talking points for us in this series. One more serious than the other. Katya, tell us about the serious talking point that might have an impact at the World Cup in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, it was really hot. It was really hot in that final T20 match between Pakistan and South Africa that Anika Bosch retired her as a precaution against heat stroke. I think it was 36, 37 degrees was it Multan they were playing in? But in Sharjah, it was hotter than that on that same day. It was 39 degrees, and it's going to rise to 40 degrees, over 40 degrees over the next week or so. It might be a bit cooler by the time the World Cup comes around, but when you're playing around with late 30s, 40s, I don't think you can use the word cool to describe it. And it's going to be a real issue. I mean, obviously it would have been hot in Bangladesh, but don't think it would have been quite that hot. England have never played a game in the UAE as a Northern Hemisphere side who probably won't deal as well with the heat as, say, Bangladesh or India will. Scotland also could be in a spot of bother.
That's going to be a big one, isn't it? England, Scotland in the daytime. So, I mean, most of the games at the World Cup are night games, games that start at 6 o'clock local time. But there are quite a few group stage games that start at 2 local time.
Scotland have 3-day games, including
that feels targeted.
The opener, which the forecast is already there for, is against Bangladesh, which now the tournament isn't in Bangladesh. Looks like an odd tournament opener, but I guess the thinking was being, let's get our host against the team they're most likely to beat and give the tournament a real kickstart. That game is supposed to be 40 degrees, and according to AccuWeather, it will really feel like it's 46 degrees. Which is too hot. So yeah, you almost want to pipe in Ali McCoy saying you fear for Scotland. You really do. So.
Yeah, I mean it's something we've talked about maybe a year or two on the weekly pod, and maybe we should do another episode on it soon, because just that cricket is, everyone says it is the most vulnerable sport to climate change for so many reasons, and I'd be interested to hear what players say before the World Cup and after the World Cup. You want to see players perform at the best of their abilities, and conditions like that are not conducive to people performing at their highest level. I think as soon as you get to 40 degrees, I think you're talking about player safety, and Scotland 3-day games that is tough. I think England only have one, but as Alice Capsey said on last week's show, that is against Scotland, so neither side you think would have a major advantage in that game.
Yeah, I guess at least in bad weather, when sides come to England, you don't play. Like if it's raining, you don't play. Whereas when England go and tour other places, the extreme weather there, you have to still play through, even if it is 40 degrees.
I guess extreme weather in England isn't dangerous around cricket, because obviously if it's extreme rain, you don't play. But I suppose I have felt bad for in previous years, Sri Lanka playing in April, May, or September.
Yeah.
And you see that they look so cold. They really
Yeah.
don't want to be there. But obviously, this is so much more dangerous.
I mean, going back to the Oz New Zealand series, Phoebe Litchfield during that said that actually, like, they are going to just do some specific heat acclimation. And if the Aussies are having to acclimatise to the heat, then you fear, you really do fear for the Scots.
Ben, we were talking about where Pakistan are as a side at the moment. There was one particular commentator who was particularly critical in his analysis of the Pakistan side. Tell us about this bit of commentary and the context around it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this was during the Champions Cup, which is the men's 50 over competition. And you think
domestic competition, but they put a lot of money behind it.
Yeah, they get some commentators in. They have a good level of streaming. You can watch it on YouTube.
The Pakistan international men's players are playing in it.
Good level cricket, and great to see women's cricket being discussed on that sort of platform, bringing it to fans of the Pakistan's men team.
So is this during like a drinks break they get on the scorecard from the Pakistan South Africa series? From
the decider in that game, in that series. And this one commentator, Ali Yunus, he is very, very opinionated. He's for some reason doesn't name this player, but he says there's someone who's batting too low in the order, and he names lots of other players that he thinks are doing the wrong thing. He says Nina Dar scoring too slow. She's got 12 of 7, which seemed like fine to me. She says the captain's got the batting order all wrong. She says that you can't be demoting players, you can't be shuffling things around like this, you can't be doing that. And then people point out, like, hang on, Ali Yunus, that's the husband of Aliyah Riaz, who made a 50 from number 6 in the first game and didn't get promotion. So maybe he's got a point, but maybe he could also declare an interest. I don't know.
Outstanding. Outstanding. And Ben, there's a Sri Lankan youngster that we should be excited about at the World Cup. Tell us about them.
Shashini Gimbani, who is 15 years old, as you say. She is a left arm wrist spinner, which is already
not
just
enough
really
left
exciting.
arm wristies.
Yeah, and according to Chamari Atapatu, she can also bowl with her right arm, which seems like overkill. Like, I know that this is actually something that a drum that Cam Ponsonby beats, which is that why would you ever bowl left arm wrist spin to turn it the same way as doing the easiest thing, which is bowling off spin with your right hand? But that's what she's doing, and that's very exciting. You can go and watch. There's highlights of Sri Lanka playing against Malaysia in the Asia Cup, and you can see she lands it pretty well. She gets some
really good fizz.
Get some fizz on it. Yeah, I mean, Malaysia players, she'll come up against best players at the World Cup, but they can't get a stick on it. And this is the Sri Lankan tradition of picking a mystery spinner that you've never heard of right before the start of the World Cup. I mean, we were looking at the guy who in the 2015 World Cup, they pick a guy for his ODI debut, and he never plays again, and that's it. So
this is more forgivable given that she's 15.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, they couldn't have.
They've not been hiding her
for a couple of years. Yeah.
But yeah, that's really exciting. And
but also don't be surprised if she doesn't play in the group stage and then they bring her in for the semi-final. That'd be very Sri Lankan.
But do look out for highlights of her bowling, because it looks really interesting, and I'm sure she will play at some point during the World Cup. Anyway, that is everything for today's show. Thanks, Katya. Thanks, Ben. Remember to head to Metrobank's social channels to watch Metrobank business customer Sophie meet with England players Lauren Bell, Kate Cross and Sarah Glenn, where they chat about who's inspired them and how Metrobank is supporting women in cricket and in business.